What if I told you that one Instagram post, just one, could shake the entire hip-hop world to its core? Not a diss track, not a leaked phone call, but a documentary clip, yes. A Netflix-style exposé that has suddenly dragged names, reputations, and decades of legacy right back into the spotlight. And the man at the center of it all? None other than 50 Cent. The same guy who never seems to play by the rules, and somehow always ends up 3 steps ahead. Because here's the question nobody is asking loudly enough: why now? Why is T.I., a man who's been through the storm before, suddenly back in the crosshairs just as whispers of a new explosive project begin to surface? Coincidence? Or something far more calculated? And let's not forget the clip itself. Short, cryptic, but heavy enough to send shockwaves across social media within minutes. Fans are reacting, critics are watching, and the industry, silent but watching very closely. Because when 50 Cent drops something like this, it's never just entertainment, it's a signal. And the question now is, what happens when that signal turns into something nobody can control? The clip didn't just drop into the internet, it landed like a warning shot. One moment, everything felt like background noise, and the next, timelines were flooded with speculation, theories, and that uneasy feeling that something bigger is quietly unfolding behind the scenes. Because whenever 50 Cent gets involved in anything, it rarely stays small for long. And this time, the focus has shifted back toward T.I. and his circle, pulling names like Tiny Harris, King Harris, and Damani Harris into the orbit of public curiosity once again. At first glance, this looks like just another wave of celebrity chatter, the kind that rises and fades within a few days, but there's a difference this time. The tone feels sharper, the reactions more divided, and the stakes somehow higher. Because this isn't just about music or casual internet drama anymore, it's about narratives, reputations, and the kind of stories that can follow someone for years, long after the headlines fade. And let's not ignore the timing. Just as T.I. has been working on reinforcing his presence in the industry, just as his name starts circulating again in connection with new projects and legacy discussions, this clip surfaces. A clip that doesn't just entertain, it questions. It provokes. It reminds people of past controversies that never fully disappeared from public memory. And when something like that resurfaces, it doesn't come back quietly. For those who've followed this situation over time, this moment feels familiar. There's a pattern here, one that involves tension building in the background before erupting into the spotlight. The history between 50 Cent and T.I. isn't built on a single disagreement. It's layered, shaped by interviews, public statements, social media exchanges, and moments where respect and rivalry seem to blur into each other. There was a time when discussions between the two felt like mutual acknowledgement, even collaboration in spirit. Conversations about respect, legacy, and even the idea of facing off in a versus-style setting once made fans excited about a potential clash between two heavyweights. But as quickly as that idea appeared, it shifted. The tone changed. And suddenly, what looked like a possible celebration of catalog and influence turned into something far more tense from there. Things escalated in a way only the internet can amplify. Comments were made, responses followed, and interpretations spread like wildfire. At some point, the narrative stopped being about music and started being about character. And once a conversation shifts into that territory, it becomes harder to control, harder to reverse, and much more likely to spiral. What makes this current moment even more intense is how modern media dynamics have evolved. A single post, a short clip, or even a deleted screenshot can now trigger widespread discussion in minutes. There's no waiting period anymore. No slow build. Everything is instant. And when someone like 50 Cent steps into that space, the impact is magnified because he doesn't just post, he frames. He doesn't just hint, he implies. And sometimes that implication is enough to ignite an entire conversation without a single follow-up. That's what makes this situation so unpredictable. Not just what is being said, but what is being suggested. And now, with the idea of a documentary floating in the air, the conversation has shifted again. Documentaries carry a different weight. They aren't like songs or interviews that fade quickly. They linger. They're archived. They're revisited. They have the potential to shape how people remember a story, not just how they react to it in the moment. That's why when people hear about a possible documentary tied to this situation, they don't treat it lightly. They start asking questions. What angle will it take? Who will be featured? What claims will be revisited? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of impact could it have on everyone involved? At the same time, it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture. Much of what's being discussed exists in the realm of speculation, commentary, and interpretation. There are references to past controversies involving T.I. and Tiny that have circulated in the public sphere before, including legal discussions, investigations, and civil matters that have been debated extensively, but the way those elements are now being reintroduced into current conversations adds a new layer of intensity. Because context matters. And when context is mixed with speculation, the result is often a narrative that feels bigger than the facts alone. And that's exactly where the public reaction comes into play. Online reactions are split. Some people see this as just another example of hip-hop's long-standing culture of rivalry, where competition, ego, and storytelling collide in ways that create drama as well as art. Others see it as something more serious, something that crosses into uncomfortable territory where entertainment and personal history begin to overlap. Then there are those who are simply watching, waiting to see what happens next, knowing that in situations like this, the next move can change everything. Because this isn't just about who said what, it's about how far things go from here. And in the background of all of this, there's still the music, the careers, the legacies that each of these individuals has built over time. T.I. in particular has long been recognized as a major figure in shaping the sound and culture of Atlanta's rap scene. His influence is not something that can be easily erased or ignored. It's embedded in the evolution of a genre that continues to dominate globally. But legacy is fragile in moments like this. It can be questioned, reframed, even challenged. And once that process begins, it's hard to predict where it ends. Meanwhile, 50 Cent remains exactly where he's always been in situations like this. At the center of attention without necessarily saying much directly, his approach has always been calculated, often leaning on timing and perception as much as direct statements. And that's what keeps people guessing. Because when someone builds a reputation for unpredictability, every move they make carries weight. Every post becomes a clue. Every silence becomes a signal. And every hint becomes part of a larger puzzle that the audience is trying to solve in real time right now. That puzzle is incomplete. There's no official confirmation of a full documentary release. No confirmed timeline. No verified list of participants or content. Just a clip. Just reactions. And just enough information to keep people talking. But sometimes, that's all it takes. Because in today's digital landscape, the idea of something can be just as powerful as the thing itself. And once that idea spreads, it takes on a life of its own. The moment the clips started circulating, the conversation didn't just grow, it evolved. What began as speculation quickly turned into a layered debate about intent, power, and influence. Because when someone like 50 Cent attaches even the slightest implication of a documentary, people don't just watch, they analyze. And in this case, the attention shifted even more intensely toward T.I. and his entire circle, including Tiny Harris, King Harris, and Damani Harris. Now, here's where things start getting interesting. The public reaction isn't unified. Some viewers see this as a calculated media move, a way to generate buzz and dominate headlines. Others believe it's something deeper, something closer to narrative control. And then there are those who think this is just the natural progression of long-standing tension finally reaching a boiling point. But regardless of perspective, one thing is undeniable. The timing of this clip feels deliberate. It arrives at a moment when attention is already high, when audiences are already engaged, and when even a small spark can ignite massive discussion. And that's exactly what happened. Within hours, blogs picked it up, fans began dissecting it, and reaction channels started framing it as something far bigger than just a clip. What makes this situation even more layered is the history behind it. This isn't a new rivalry that suddenly appeared overnight. It's built on years of interaction, indirect exchanges, and moments where things seemed calm on the surface but carried tension underneath. That history matters because it shapes how people interpret every new move. When 50 Cent speaks or even hints, people remember his track record. They remember how he's used social media, interviews, and even production projects to influence narratives. And they remember that once he commits to something, he tends to follow through in ways that catch people off guard. At the same time, T.I. isn't new to controversy either. Over the years, he's faced discussions, allegations, and public scrutiny that have followed him through different phases of his career. Some of those discussions were addressed, some were challenged, and others remain part of ongoing public conversation. But what matters now is how those past moments are being revisited in the present. Because when a new wave of attention hits, the internet doesn't just look forward, it looks back. Old clips resurface, old headlines get reanalyzed, and old conversations get reintroduced into a new context. That's exactly what's happening here. The current narrative isn't just about what's happening now. It's about how the past is being reframed in light of the present. And that creates pressure. Pressure on perception, pressure on reputation, and pressure on how each move is interpreted moving forward. Meanwhile, the documentary angle continues to dominate speculation. The idea that a project could exist or is being hinted at, that might explore past controversies involving T.I. and Tiny adds a level of seriousness that goes beyond typical hip-hop disputes. Because documentaries, unlike songs or interviews, have permanence. They don't just trend and fade. They remain accessible, revisitable, and often become reference points in future discussions. That's why people are reacting so strongly. Because if something like this were to be fully realized, it wouldn't just be a moment, it would be a record. And records have a way of shaping perception long after the initial discussion is over. Public figures understand this dynamic well. That's why responses in situations like this are often measured. Some choose silence. Others respond directly. And some engage indirectly through music or subtle statements. Each approach carries risk because once the conversation is public, control becomes harder to maintain. In the middle of all this, fans play a huge role. They amplify content, create theories, and drive narratives forward. Some defend, some criticize, and some simply observe. But collectively, they shape how far a story travels. And in this case, the audience isn't passive, they're actively engaged, breaking down every frame of the clip, every caption, and every possible meaning behind it. And then there's the matter of influence. 50 Cent has built a reputation not just as an artist, but as someone who understands media better than most. His involvement in projects like documentaries has shown that he knows how to position content in a way that maximizes attention and impact. Whether directly or indirectly involved, his name alone is enough to generate discussion. That's why even a hint of his involvement changes the tone of the entire situation. It's no longer just about the content. It's about the potential reach, the possible narrative, and the audience that will engage with it. On the other side, T.I. is navigating this in a different way. As an artist with a long-standing career, his focus includes not just responding to current conversations, but maintaining his legacy. That means balancing public perception with artistic output, while also managing how past and present narratives intersect. And that balance isn't easy because every response can be interpreted in multiple ways. Every silence can be interpreted in multiple ways, and every action adds another layer to a story that's already complex. As discussions continue online, new voices keep entering the conversation. Some offer opinions, some present theories, others claim to have insights, adding to the noise and making it harder to separate signal from speculation. But that's part of how modern media works. Information spreads quickly, but clarity often takes longer to catch up. What's clear, though, is that this situation isn't fading anytime soon. The clip may have been short, but its impact is long. It reopened conversations that were never fully closed, brought attention back to individuals who have been in the spotlight before, and created a space where speculation can thrive. And as long as there are unanswered questions, the discussion will continue because that's how these stories evolve. Not in a single moment, but in waves. Each new piece of information adds to the narrative, each reaction adds to the momentum, and each interpretation adds to the complexity. Right now, we're in the middle of that process, and the next move could change everything. That as the conversation continues to build, the situation starts to feel less like a passing moment and more like a developing story with no clear endpoint in sight. The clip that sparked everything may have been brief, but its ripple effect has reached far beyond its original context. And now, all eyes are still locked on 50 Cent, waiting to see whether this is just another strategic tease or the beginning of something much bigger aimed at T.I. and his circle, including Tiny Harris, King Harris, and Domani Harris at this point. The narrative has already taken on a life of its own. What started as a single piece of content has turned into a full-blown discussion across platforms, with people analyzing not just what was shown, but what it could mean. And in situations like this, meaning often matters more than the content itself, because perception spreads faster than facts, and once a narrative forms, it becomes incredibly difficult to reshape. One of the biggest reasons this situation continues to gain traction is uncertainty. There is no confirmed documentary release, no official timeline, and no detailed explanation of what is actually being developed behind the scenes. But that uncertainty is exactly what keeps people engaged. It creates room for speculation, for theories, and for constant updates that keep the story alive. And that's where 50 Cent's influence becomes even more apparent. He understands how to use ambiguity as a tool. Instead of revealing everything at once, he releases fragments, small pieces that encourage discussion, analysis, and anticipation. And that anticipation keeps the audience hooked. It turns a simple post into a conversation that lasts for days, sometimes even weeks. Meanwhile, T.I. is left in a position where silence and response both come with consequences. If he chooses to ignore the situation, it can be interpreted as avoidance or lack of engagement. If he responds, it risks amplifying the situation even further, giving more visibility to the very narrative he may not want to highlight. This is the challenge of modern celebrity dynamics. Control is no longer just about what is said, but about how and when it is said. Timing, tone, and platform all play critical roles in shaping how a message is received. And in this case, the absence of a clear response has only fueled more discussion. At the same time, it's important to recognize that not everything being discussed is verified. Many of the claims, theories, and interpretations circulating online remain unconfirmed. Some are based on past events, others on speculation, and some are simply amplified opinions. But in the digital space, repetition often creates a sense of credibility. Even when that credibility isn't backed by concrete evidence, that's why this situation is so complex. It exists at the intersection of entertainment, perception, and speculation, and each of those elements feeds into the other, creating a cycle that keeps the conversation going. There's also the question of intent. Is this about storytelling? Is it about exposure? Is it about control? Or is it simply about generating attention in an industry where attention is currency? Different people will have different interpretations. Some will see this as a strategic move designed to shift focus and dominate headlines. Others will view it as a continuation of long-standing tensions. And some will approach it with skepticism, questioning whether the scale of the reaction matches the reality of the situation. But regardless of perspective, one thing is certain. This situation has captured attention in a way that few others do, because it involves more than just individuals. It involves legacy, reputation, and the way stories are told and retold over time. It involves how narratives are constructed and how they influence public perception. And most importantly, it involves how quickly those narratives can spread in today's media landscape. As the discussion continues, one of the biggest questions becomes what happens next? Will there be a follow-up clip? Will there be an official announcement? Will this remain in the realm of speculation? Or will it evolve into something more concrete? Those questions remain unanswered, and that uncertainty is what keeps people watching. In the meantime, both sides remain under scrutiny. Every public appearance, every post, every statement is being observed and analyzed, because in situations like this, even the smallest action can be interpreted in multiple ways. And that's the reality of being in the spotlight today. There's no real pause button. Once a story gains momentum, it continues to move forward, regardless of whether the people involved are ready for it or not. For now, the clip remains the focal point. A piece of content that may have been brief, but whose impact continues to expand. It has sparked discussions, raised questions, and drawn attention to individuals who have long been part of the conversation in hip-hop and beyond. And as long as those discussions continue, the story isn't over, because in this environment, stories don't end when the content stops. They end when the audience stops talking. And right now, they're still talking now. The real question is, where does this all go from here? Because what we're witnessing isn't just another celebrity moment that fades with time. This is the kind of situation that can reshape narratives, reputations, and maybe even the way the industry handles stories moving forward. Do you think this clip is just harmless hype? Or is there something much bigger being set in motion behind the scenes?